Okay, thank you. I shall give you a previous kind of warning. I'm finishing my PhD, so if I turn this into self-indulgence talk, please warn me, because I've been focusing on that for quite a while. So I'm going to show you Spatium, as Alex said, that yes, uses his tools, this reverb thing here, and I'll talk to you a bit about that. But I also going to talk to you on why did I do this, and why did I thought that we still needed some more tools for sound specialization. So I think some of you might relate to that. When I came to electroacoustic music, spatialization was one of the most incredible things that mesmerized me when I was working. Going to, I remember being very afraid of the mixing board. People told me, "Oh, go make the diffusion of your piece," and I was like, "Oh, well, what do I do with this?" But it was incredibly powerful, and it was really something that added quite a lot to the piece. And so I started my PhD thinking, well, I don't want to use spatialization as a performance of the piece. I don't want to use spatialization as an ornament of a piece composed with other ideas. I wanted for the space and spatialization of sound to be the guiding force of the pieces. So all the material for my pieces comes from space and comes from spatialization, or at least some concepts related. So I started this by, of course, analyzing what came before. And I divided spatialization because I read all these articles, and they talked about kinematic specialization, they talked about diffusion, they talked about dynamic specialization, they talked about amplification, and it was not always very clear what they meant. So as a discipline, as I tried to discipline my work, I tried to divide, it's not a taxonomy or something, but I tried to divide approaches to spatialization. And actually this classification comes after looking at these works. So I now put these works into perspective inside this classification. So I talk about gestural spatialization. And for me, this gestural spatialization that is connected with the diffusion, the performance act of diffusing sounds into space, comes from musique concrète, and comes from Pierre-Henri, Potentiomètre d'Espace, and especially comes from Dennis Smalley. I don't know if you've ever read his articles on the spectral morphology of sound. It comes with the idea, at least the way I look at it, it comes with the idea that the gestural properties of the sound expand themselves into space. So space is a way of organizing those gestures into sound. And of course, Acousmonium and the Birmingham, sorry, just let me do this so I have my own notes. Because we're having the same, I'm seeing the same screen as you, and that would make my notes useless. So, okay, but still I don't have my notes. This is something that should not happen when I'm defending my thesis. Okay, notes. Thanks. The Birmingham Electroacoustic Sound Theatre, I needed notes because I didn't know what BEAST standard for. And I think I was about to include your own diffusion system, but I never heard it, so I was not quite sure if I should include it here. But in a sense, in most diffusion systems, what you have is like kind of spread out stereo pairs. And in fact, you have articles that state that. You have articles that say, if you have multiple stereo pairs and the audience is large, so at least one of the stereo pairs will be good for the position you're at. And those stereo pairs interact with the room. And especially if you think of the Potentiomètre d'Espace, it's a gestural control of a specific track, a fifth track at the time. You think about this gesture of spatialization. And I oppose this to the kinematic approach to spatialization, which is something that I find is more concerned with the control of the geometry of motion, not of the gestural, not so much of the gestural. Of course, the geometry of motion can include gesture, but it's focused on the geometry of motion, position, velocity, acceleration, but without generally considering external causes for this movement. And that's something I'm going to talk a bit about. And next. So here, of course, you see all this spatialization software where you draw lines in space. Of course, here you are concerned with the geometry of motion when you are drawing this. And in the Osaka pavilion from Stockhausen, he had this sound mill, he had this potentiometer that he twisted, that he rotated to rotate sound in various circles. It's funny to think about this because as in previous one, they were concerned, there are some writings that they were concerned that all of the audience listened to at least one good stereo pair. In this configuration, actually, there is only one place where it actually works really well. And that is, of course, the space Stockhausen occupied. The place that the composers always occupy, the sweet spot. Okay, and we still have, and I think this is, I'm not trashing it. I think this is a brilliant idea, and I'm really glad that there are still many auditoriums being built with this idea in mind, this Stockhausen idea in mind of a sphere of sound. But then, it occurred to me that if I have kinematic spatialization, do I have static spatialization? If you're thinking classical mechanics, static, all bodies are in movement. It depends on the referential. So when you work in the statics, you're basically ignoring movement and instead focusing on the way the body interacts with a fixed space. So in this way, this is Pedro Rebelo's shadow quartet, where violins are actually the diffusers for the electroacoustic part. They have the contact transducers, and the sound is impregnated with the way the violin interacts with the sound. Of course, this also, you can trace this back to the Ondes Martineau and all the diffuseurs that changed the qualities of sound, but they didn't change they didn't make movements of sound. They just interacted with the space in a particular way. And of course, now you have these multi-channel hemispherical speakers that start popping all around. And these two interact with the space in what I call static spatialization. And then, if you have static and you have kinematic, of course you need dynamic spatialization. For me, dynamic spatialization is when you are concerned with the causes of the movement, as opposed to the traditional focus on the geometry of motion. And here, I don't know if you know the work of this guy, this Bernhard Leitner. Have you ever heard of him? He's an architect. Who has heard of him? Okay, he's a brilliant, I think his work is absolutely brilliant. And he's an architect that kind of works in trying to define spaces through sound instead of defining them through light, basically. And this series, this sound swing series, is something really, really cool. He uses pendulum-like movements of sounds. And you walk, in this one you lie down, but there are some installations where you walk and you have pendulum sounds going around you. The thing is, he actually simulated these sounds using amplitude curves. So he's basically using pan-potting techniques to simulate this pendulum music, to simulate this pendulum movements. And what I thought is, if we have physical simulation inside our computers, why not use the real thing and use physical simulation of pendulums and of other causes to spatialize sound? And that's really important, because if you try to do a pendulum movement, it has the acceleration of gravity, which is arguably the acceleration we are most familiar with. can we hear gravity? That's something, that's one of the questions I asked in my work. And if you try to simulate a pendulum using traditional spatialization controls, it actually is very hard to find, because if you define a curve that says at this specific time the sound is here, at this specific time the sound is here, you actually need many points to do the acceleration, so you have this smooth movement. And if you read some psychology works about the way we hear space, then you read that sometimes, or actually most of the times, it's more important for the perception of the position of sound in space, your expectations about the sound, than the actual place of the sound itself. The most striking example of that is when you have visual cues. When you have visual cues, basically all your auditory cues are ignored because you just focus on what you're seeing. But even if you don't see, if you have expectations about the qualities of the movement, then these prevail to the actual physical perception. So, one of the things that I'm going to show you is I try to design interfaces for spatialization that you actually have few control of the position of the sound, but you have lots of control over the causes that cause the movement of this spatialization. And, of course, this was not something I took out of the blue. There were lots of works focusing on the spatialization of especially granular synthesis using swarming and flocking behaviors, and I was inspired a lot by that. Of course, this classification, again, is for my own work, because I showed you previous works with my classification, but some works are not that easy to classify. For example, Stockhausen's contact. Do you know what this picture is? This is a very famous picture. Do you know what he's doing? This is absolutely brilliant. He wanted to make rotary movements. He still didn't have the sound wheel that he had in Osaka. So what he did, he placed a loudspeaker, 4 microphones, in a moving table. So he would basically literally move the sounds around to spatialize the sounds. And this is incredible because it made all the effects that we use to perceive sound spatialization, it made them possible. But this is actually hard to classify because he wanted to do what I call kinematic spatialization, but he's using gestural spatialization in a way. So it's kind of difficult to classify. Répond by Boulez is another example. He traces the movements in a very geometrical way, but what this spatialization is doing is doing the spatialization of musical gestures, and it is connected with the musical gestures it's spatializing. So it's ambiguous, this classification, and this is arguably not sound spatialization, but Steve Reich's pendulum music. The sounds you hear are a result of the causes of the movement, but they are not moving the sound in space, they are just enabling the sound to exist in a different way. So the sound is fixed. Is it static spatialization? Is it dynamic spatialization? I don't know. So the question is, why do I think we needed yet another spatialization tool? It was found, this is a very interesting article, Niels Peters et al. Published in Computer Music Journal. And they found that they did some questions to several composers, and they found that although all of the composers who answered were interested in sound spatialization, almost all of them still use the built-in panning devices of their DAWs, of digital audio workstations, of mixing consoles, or they were forced to develop their own solutions. And in fact, if you search online for spatialization tools, I would think that a lot of them emerged from the necessity of specific composers that started working on their own custom solutions, or their institutions started working on solutions and then made them available to the public. And Spatium is that. I made Spatium for myself, But when I was making it, I was also thinking that I was going to throw it out into the world. And it's all free, all open source, so you can do whatever you want with it. And you just need to share it with the same Creative Commons license. It's share alike. And here, some existing stratified tools for sound spatialization focus on the possibility of controlling different spatial rendering algorithms from one common interface. If you read the specifications of Spatium, they actually say that in the article. It's good to the possibility of controlling different spatial rendering algorithms from one common interface. From my point of view, and arguably from a composer's perspective, I really believe that the most interesting capability of a modular approach is actually the other way around. As we saw before, the interface you use to make music is absolutely determinant in the music you make, in the possibilities that enables you. If you need to find workarounds around the interface you're using, that can lead to interesting possibilities, but can actually make your work difficult. Or the other way around, it's sometimes dangerous when you're using always the same interface that you don't control yourself. I found that sometimes it's dangerous because you end up allowing the interface to make some musical decisions for you. So I found that for me it was really, really important that this spatialization software enabled me to have one spatialization renderer and then to use just any interface I want to do the spatialization at whatever point I want. So, I built Max MSP objects for the spatialization. Spatialization renderers, I have two, one based on ambisonics and my own objects that I will describe briefly, and one based on vector-based amplitude panning, a very popular panning technique. And I have several spatialization interfaces, but some dynamic, some kinematic, not kinetic, kinematic, and gestural. And I have audio unit plugins. And the way this works is, I made the Max MSP objects to make the spatialization renderers. And you might ask, if you are into ambisonics, you might ask why did my own objects for spatialization using ambisonics instead of using the huge number of great, actually much better than mine, objects for Max. The thing is, when I started doing ambisonics, I don't know how many of you used or at least are interested in ambisonics. I don't know. Okay, not. I hope that changes. Okay, ambisonics is this brilliant thing. When I discovered ambisonics, I was like, how is this not the most successful standard ever for sound spatialization? And it's actually, you can find some answers, and you can find some marketing and commercial answers, but you can also find some answers that the concept behind it and the concepts you need to really understand in order to successfully do are not trivial. And as I was doing software for spatialization that was aimed for composers who, some of them don't even know how to program in Max, how would I expect them to understand what kind of weighting orders they should choose on the kind of mixed order scheme or something like that? So I designed my own objects with vector-based amplitude panning in mind, because I found through some conversations with colleagues that the main reason behind the popularity of vector-based amplitude panning, well, other than the fact that it works, is that it is very easy to implement. It's very, very easy to implement. And the other thing, almost all ambisonics objects I found were audio-based objects, which meant that they were probably not that easy to maintain, and sometimes they were hard to hack. I will show you in a minute one thing I needed to hack into this object. And I found that if I made my objects as vector-based amplitude panning. So it's Max object, not an MSP object, that controls a matrix. The thing is, the VBAP object is the same code since, I don't know, 2005 or 2006. It's a Max 4, and it instantly got upgraded to 64-bit audio as soon as Max 6 came out, because it's, you know, it's just a Max object. It's very, and there's another thing. I'm not a very good programmer, so it's a lot easier, as Alex can tell you probably, to make a Max object than it is to make an MSP object. But I designed my ambisonics objects. They have only the possibility of using the mixed order scheme I used for Spatium, which is always the same. You can't change that. But I make them so that they would be almost compatible with VBAP. It's almost like you have a patch using VBAP and you want to try my ambisonics objects. You just need to, like, 5-minute mess with the patch and it's instantly using this object. So that was the main goal. Okay, so what happens now? Even if you ignore the Max objects, you don't need to use Max to use this. You have the Spatialization renderer, of which the ambisonics is the main one. The vector-based amplitude panning is, I shall tell you the truth, it's here because my PhD supervisor likes VBAP better than he likes ambisonics. So that's the only reason that's here. You have the Spatialization renderer that receives audio either from Max, from your digital audio workstation, from wherever you want, using something like Jack or Soundflower, this fake audio interface internal that's root audio inside your computer. I'm sorry if my English is sometimes tricky to understand. It receives the audio, and then you can choose for whatever, it has 16 channels of input, 16 monophonic channels of input. You can choose whatever interface you want to control each of the inputs at any given time. And then if you choose to work with the digital audio workstation, you have audio unit plugins that don't process the audio at all. They pass the audio as they find it. The only thing they do is that they can be controlled via MIDI by any Spatium interface and record the spatialization as an automation. And then they send this automation via OSC to the spatialization renderer. Or you can just draw your own curves and it will send them via OSC to the spatialization renderer. Okay, so why ambisonics? And I won't dive into many details about this, but this is part of the patent that the Bell Laboratories developed in the 1930s for stereo. And you see that this was their idea. A curtain of microphones that was connected to a curtain of loudspeakers. This is actually what we would call wave field synthesis. It's basically the same concept. And what you have here is a blue-line pair, which this brilliant guy called Alan Blumlein devised also in the 30s for stereo sound. And it's basically a simplified version of ambisonics, or actually the other way around. Ambisonics is an evolved version of this. The thing is, recently, it was found that ambisonics is actually, or ultra high order ambisonics is actually a particular case of wave field synthesis. So it's kind of funny to think that for almost a century, we were exploring different paths that actually are kind of meeting in the end. But ambisonics, the main reason why I use ambisonics is for this. One of the most frustrating things for me was to compose an 8-channel piece and then have a venue that had 6 channels. I was like, what do I do? And then I composed the 6-channel piece and I want to give it away on a CD, and I need to make a stereo version of it, and it's never satisfying, and so on. Or I compose an 8-channel piece and I go to a full periphonic sound ball, and I don't really have any use for it other than ornamenting by using the different levels of space. And ambisonics has that encoding, decoding capability, but it still had a problem. although you have some distance encoding in ambisonics, and I'll go through this very fast because some of this might be a bit out of the scope of this talk, but you have some ways to encode distance in ambisonics, some more clever ways than the one I used actually. But for most of them, you need to know in advance not the number of speakers, but the distance that they are from you when encoding. And that defeats the purpose, because if you need to know the distance of speakers when you are composing, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having, of being able to decode to any number of speakers. So what I did, I took something called W panning, which is something that makes ambisonics, when you encode the sound field of ambisonics, you actually encode the sounds on the surface, what we could call the surface of the sphere or of the circle defined by the loudspeaker. And there is this technique called W panning, when you want sounds to be inside of the sound field, you could make them disappear from all the figure-of-8 microphones and just be in the omnidirectional microphone. But the thing is, you lose control on how do you apply the distance cues that we need, loudness, air absorption, reverb, to the decoding stage. So what I did was actually made an extra channel to ambisonics to encode the center of the sphere. So then I can have control over what happens. It's okay if you don't care about this, or okay, because I'll show you what this does in practice. I used Max to do the spatialization renderers, but I chose to use processing to do the interfaces. How many of you know processing? Okay, processing is very, very good because it's an open source interface development environment. And you have loads and loads and loads of websites that have this particle swarming, this Generative Gestaltung book, which is now in English, has a website filled with examples of simulations of generative design. And by designing all my code in processing, you are, if you understand processing, you are really able to download this simulation for 1,000 birds flying with obstacles and stuff, and just add a few OSC commands, and you have it controlling your spatialization interface. And of course, you can use whatever interface you want. And if you want to do really advanced kinematic spatialization, there's this Yannick's software, an evolution of the Xenakis UPIC idea, which is a brilliant software that you can use to do all these kinds of stuff. So, as I said, you have these interfaces. I'm going to show you this in action. And this is the Spatium, the spatialization renderer interface. I designed it to be really, really small because this is something that you see, that you use alongside your other tools. So it's always there on the corner of the screen. This is made in Max. So you have 16 channel inputs, and then you can select what kind of inputs you want to use. You have this spatialization effects, granular and spectral spatialization. So you can do granular synthesis, very simple granular synthesis, or divide the first input into 16 spectral channels. You can record or play pre-recorded ambisonics sound fields. And then here you can select if you have stereo. Stereo uses UHJ, which is the encoding technique I'm going to use today. You can have binaural, you can have all the platonic solids, you can have hexaphonic, octaphonic, whatever. So you work on your piece and you can be confident. That's the major breakthrough for me, was that I only have stereo speakers at home. And I really can be confident, and I was afraid that I really can be confident about doing my spatialization and doing my works using a stereo, and then I go into a room and I have an octafile set up and it will all work beautifully. It's not a problem at all. And this is the most important thing. You have the decoder settings, so you can decide the orders of ambisonics if you want to go that way, but you can also decide what is the level and the equalization of your center channel. So you can decide actually how big is your room. And of course, to decide that, you also need reverb, and that's where the HIS tools came along for the convolution reverb, because you have this open air library that has free Creative Commons, I think, license impulse responses, and some of them are B format, which is less resolution than the Spatium uses. Spatium uses a third order ambisonics, but for the reverb, as it is only, I add reverb, I don't do the full convolution, so you always hear the dry signal. That's not a problem because the reverb is diffused, so that's not a problem. Okay, so thank you, Alex, in person for the first time since I developed this, for developing this convolution reverb externals. So, time for a demo. Not time for thank you still. So, oh, nice. Nice desktop. Mirror. Okay. Oh, and it's here again. Okay. So the first thing I do, I open Spatium. I can show you the Max patch as well, but you have it online. You can download the source of everything. So here I have the 16 inputs. I have the audio settings. These mimic the Max audio settings. So I'm going to use audio box USB. Okay. Turn the audio on. And now I don't have an input running here, so I'll just use the granular, just as an example. And for, okay. Sorry about this. Do I have volume control here? Okay, I can use this one. I'm going to use this pink noise for a while, just to show you what this does. So I open an interface. Let's open a dynamic interface. Of course, this would be better if we had a periphonic setup, but and I can control the decoder settings, so I can make the center part with more highs and lows, make it louder. And then I can add some nice reverb. As I'm using OSC, I can just go in here and I change the channel. I'm now controlling the 5th channel, or I can even control all the channels at once just by changing one parameter. The thing is, and the beauty of OSC, is that if I want to use this controller to control other spatialization controller, I can actually do that. I can actually open a spring interface that I'm going to show you in a minute, and use this pendulum controlling the anchor of the spring, and then the spring is controlling the spatialization. Or I can just use this interface to control the tremolo rate of a MIDI plugin, of an audio unit plugin, or whatever, because I'm also sending this as MIDI. And you can see this is a dynamic interface. So what I'm controlling here is I'm controlling the gravity, I'm controlling damping, I'm controlling the real length of the pendulum as opposed to the spatialization length. So I can actually have, like, even if they do the same space, one can be a really 50-meter long pendulum and the other can be a very, very small and faster pendulum, etc. So my dynamic spatialization interfaces are this pendulum, are this flocking, which was one of the first inspirations for this. So you create these birds, you can create up to 16 birds, and they actually automatically assign themselves to the 16 channels. I actually coded this by hand, so you have X, Y, XZ, and YZ projection, and then you have the 3D interface here, because I needed to control this with a mouse. So if you want to do this kind of projection 3D interfaces, you can download the source and you have the library to do this. Which, incredibly, was the most difficult thing to do of all this code, was to create this library to do this. Okay, so I can control this works really well for granular synthesis. And for example, all of these parameters can be controlled by OSC. So for example, I can use the pendulum to control this mouse cohesion thing. And I could have like granular spatialization doing this kind of stuff. And we can actually hear this. But instead, okay, probably not the best. Stereo is probably not the best system to hear this. And then, okay, I love this one, this gravity balls. So you can create up to 16 balls as well. Okay. You release them. Then you control the gravity. They follow this gravity with as many acceleration as you want. So you can have them slowly following this gravity. You can actually disconnect the gravity altogether. And you can slingshot them. So if you grab one, you can slingshot them against the others and against the balls. I'm going to show you a musical example of this in a minute. Okay, this is, I mean, I had loads of fun with this. Then you have a two-dimensional version of the pendulum. You'll notice that most of the interfaces are only two-dimensional spatialization. And that's only because I don't have access to any 3D spatialization room. So it's basically, so here you release the pendulum and this actually goes in two dimensionals like this. And you can place the gravity wherever you want. So you can trick the pendulum. It's falling, no, it's falling to this, it's falling to that, etc. And then you have one that was inspired by Lemur, the application we've seen before, which is this spring. You have this anchor, you can place as many anchors as you want. But the anchors must stay inside the sound field. Oh, sorry. Okay. But the spatialization particle can be whatever your screen allows it to be, and then you can just trigger it. Again, controlling the rest size and the constant of the spring. These are all physical models of actual pendulums and stuff. This one, these are the kinematic specialization. This rotation, you can define the elevation and the radius, and basically you just control the acceleration. So it's always accelerating. If you press here, the acceleration is 0, so it keeps the same velocity. But then I can make it go deaccelerate, accelerate in the other direction, etc. So I'm actually controlling the acceleration. It's a kinematic, where I'm controlling the geometry of it. And then I have this, which, if you like, this Bezier Curve interface. If you like this interface, get it fast, because I'm deleting it in a few weeks. I'm substituting this interface for another one. Of course, if you really like it, and you can email me, I'll send it to you. But I'm not really pleased with this. But I'll show you anyhow, because it's the one that uses one thing I was not showing you yet, which is the audio unit plugins. So I have Ableton Live here, and with any interface, actually I can open a previous one, like this pendulum. This pendulum is controlling channel 1, as you see here. But if I change it to MIDI, it's now controlling this plugin that I have here. I have azimuth, which jumps. I have elevation, and I have radius. So this is one of the things I wanted. I'm working in my digital audio workstation, and for this particular part, I want a pendulum doing this spatialization, but then I stop, and for the immediately succeeding part, I want to use a spring. And so I just open the spring interface, turn it to MIDI, put the automation in record. Actually, it's deleting the previous one. But now I'm using the spring to control the spatialization of this. When I stop and I play, it's controlling. Actually, it's controlling channel 11. If I open here, I can make it to channel 1. And this is sending VOSC here. Again, you can use this plugin for whatever you want. If you want to have an OSC, a plugin that sends OSC to your Max patch, you can just use this to do whatever you want. And the reason I open this now is because this Bezier interface you can actually open and save curves and you can then synchronize these curves with Ableton or with whatever DAW you're using this SpotUMaster plugin, which basically only sends the playhead position VOSC. So I can place, for example, a marker here, and then I can play for a bit. Actually, this is something that I've not tested before. I placed this marker is after this one. This will not work probably. Oh, it does. It's fine. If I make it looped, it will make a loop using the time that I did. And of course I can place this as MIDI and record the automation. So this is basically a way if you want to draw some curves and make them beautiful spatialization things. But again, be quick if you like this one, because I don't, and I will do it. Okay, so we end up, okay.
So can you control any automation that you could normally do in a DAW, so you could use that to just generate automation for a filter or whatever?
Yeah, I have a friend that's using these interfaces to control visual, he's a VJ. He's using these interfaces to make, I think the correct word in English is things. His screen. Yes, this is just OSC, and again, are the gestural interfaces. I have one which is very simple. It's based on the sound mill by Stockhausen, and I found that controlling spatialization in a circular space is very difficult using the mouse. So I transformed this. I called it linear rotation, so you're basically controlling the azimuth as a fader. This is the simplest one. You have this trackpad, where when you press the space bar, it actually turns your trackpad into a spatialization. This is the full trackpad. And if you use one finger, it spatializes in one dimension. If you use two fingers, the second one will give you elevation. So you can. This is. It's pretty hard. One is really cool. Then you have this one controlling circles and the other one controlling elevation. And suddenly, it's strange if you try to do that. If you try to turn this into one direction and then come with this, and they will all mess. Doesn't work. But then you have this control OSC, which is my favorite gestural one, because you have this control OSC app, which is also a controller for the iPad or the iPhone, that is free. It exists also for Android, and you can design your own interfaces via JavaScript, so it's really cool. But it loses connection every time, so it's not something you want to use on stage, probably. For that, use the landmark. And you can, built in, when you download Control OSC, it has this. It's not working. Maybe the network went down. Yes. Okay. Awkward silence. Hopefully, we'll end up soon. Okay. This is not connecting. See, I'm doing publicity to Lemur. Okay. So you have this multitouch. You can control how many movements you want. Of course, this works better on an iPad than on an iPhone. It's kind of strange to do multi-channel spatialization on an iPhone. But I have here the other interface that basically just sends the gyroscope of the iPhone. So you can do this Jedi spatialization. You can actually, it's 3D, so you can go into a room and just have a bunch of speakers and do things like this. And you can multiply this interface, so you can have like 10 people with iPhones going in on the space, and each one spatializes one sound, and you have a performance of spatialization, a Jedi spatialization. Okay, do I have
musical example?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
That would be nice.
Okay. I'm going to show you one of the pieces. I developed many, many pieces, as you can imagine. PhD. I'm going to show you the simplest one, because I think it's the one where the spatialization works really well. You can see from the score, it's actually very, very simple. You had a piano here. You had as many speakers as you like. I used 6. You have a flute, a cello, a violin, and a bass clarinet. And I wanted to do a piece where we had video showing the spatialization. So the video was a visual aid to the spatialization. The video was made in real time, and it was controlled by the piano part. So the piano triggered the video, and in turn, the video controlled the spatialization and was the cue for the conductor to conduct all the musicians. So the piece, actually, the piece is so simple. The harmonies are really, really simple. I could tell you a bit about that, but we don't have time. Ask me a question if you want to know that. The score is so simple. I made the score that simple because my initial idea was that the musicians didn't have a traditional score at all. They had the harmony, the simple harmony, and they would follow the video with no conductor. So the video was the score at the same time. Of course, I did this because I read all those articles that said that when you have a video aid, you can hear spatialization much better. So, just a quick note that the audience didn't have, but might be of interest. When you have here these pendulums, this works in 3D like this. Of course, we only have stereo, but when you have this pendulum or this thing is the bidimensional space like this. So this pendulum does this, which I'm explaining because you won't hear with the stereo. You will hear, but not that good. And the main idea behind the piece is, can we hear gravity? Can we hear, how does it called, how do you call it?
Friction.
Friction. Okay, thank you. You understand Portuguese?
Italian.
Okay. The piece is all without friction. Only in the end we have friction, and you will notice that the sounds change completely when you have friction. You will hear breathing sounds, because breathing is a bit about friction, I think, is the way I see it as well. Okay. This is a lively one. That's it. Okay, thank you.
Maybe just a couple of quick questions. Everything was totally clear? Okay, well you can grab free later.
Either that or you just all fell asleep. So.
And you can download the software. Where do they get it from?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, that's
That's the big question.
Yeah.
So we can also add Jedi.
yes. Spatium dot my name dot pt, and you can download the software and the source of everything, including the audio unit plugin. So if any of you wants to mess with that code that is buggy as hell and translate it to VST and or something,